So let's go over the short background. Again, who in the world are these morons here? Well, guess what? They're all the private bankers, the one that killed the people on the Titanic. So these are all the big central banks. We'll keep coming back to these idiots as we go along, but you also have to know the Queen of England has always gotten her entrails inside of our system. And we could go through this with the War of 1812. It had nothing to do with the 1812 time frame. It was that we already had a central bank because Alexander Hamilton actually enacted it in the second presidency as the Treasury chairman under Adams, which Adams was one of my favorite presidents because of some of the stuff that he did. Most people don't like him, but he believed in a central government that was way too powerful in this point. But they gave money to the Queen. And they were paying money to the Queen until 1812, where they said, well, they ran out of money. And then they came in and attacked. There's so many things you don't understand about your history. Now, the reality is that once these idiots set it up here, and they only set it up in 1913, we jump over to 1914, not even a year later before they enact their first big event. This was a massive money maker. That 30 million people die in World War I. Now, some of the idiot history books try to tell you 10 million people. It's a lie from the pit of hell. And here's the point. Some little duke, Archduke Prince Ferdinand and his wife are shot in the streets of Sarajevo. And yet, a whole war comes together. When you look at through the war, and normally it was this country versus that country, or these countries versus these countries. So it might be a little bit more of a conglomeration, right? We have all these names of wars that explain things like the War of the Roses and on and on. But we had to come up with World War I because we lost track of all the people that were against each other. But did you know that our Fed bankers, writing things wrong here. The Fed bankers gave money to both sides. And it was a point. It's so that they could bring the money into America, which we move in to the 1920s into the boom. This is called the Roaring Twenties. And here's how the basic next step of their steal comes in. So they stole from the world to get this. And this bankrupted the world over, and it would be in the late 20s before this would actually occur. So how they first set this up is they set up a point of margin. Now in margin, what would happen is I want you to just bring up a point. So Scott wants to buy a company called XPP, okay? Fictional company, don't worry about it, okay? Now in XPP, we're gonna say it's $10 a share, and he wants to get 10,000, which he normally would have to pay $10,000 to buy that company, right? They said, nah, you just have to come up with 10%. It's like the point of the tithe. Isn't kind of interesting? Just come up with 10%. So you have to come up with $1,000 so that you could own 10,000 shares. Now you always have to pay back the margin, okay? There's always a call. The call would always happen when you sold it. That was how it was written in that way. Now we go through this time frame until 1929. And what you're missing in the point is that in February, these idiot Fed bankers met and they said, we're going to put something called, referred to as a call. And they were going to put a different time frame. It was going to be off in the fall before they would set this time frame. Now, let's just say that Scott's stock has now gone up to $30 for that 1,000 shares, or it's worth $30,000. Now, at this time frame, that's a massive amount of money. That's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in essence. Now, Scott still has to pay back the $9,000, but he would have $21,000 in his bank account. Well, it's tons of money, right? How did they fix this? First, they start with a false flag. Now, go look at this, and Bugs Moran shoots up 7 men in Bloody Valentine's 1929. I submit to you that this is another false flag. Don't look at what we're doing over here with the Fed meeting. Look over here in Chicago with this Bloody Valentine shooting. Holy cow, this is bad. Don't look. Here's a false flag event, because the Fed always does something and they cover their tracks. Now, in October, we have the event. Now, it was actually occurring a little bit as we go along. And we needed buyers. But there were none. No one was buying. Everyone was selling. So my stock that was at 30 bucks goes down to something called penny shares. This is the first time. Gosh, I cannot type, right here today. Sorry about that. This is the first time that we actually see this term. And so the stock might be worth 3 cents, let's say, okay? So it's worth 300 bucks. Well, I'm not even close to paying back this. So I lose every bit of it. They don't just give you back the 700 bucks. You don't get anything. You don't give you the 300 bucks. You don't get anything because you still haven't paid your amount back. That's just the way that they stole it. And then that thing, the shares would raise up, and they stole from Scott. And we turn around and we move into the 20s, up to the 30s, and we have a massive crash. And it wipes the people out. So they got my money up front. Do you see how that works? Now, under FDR, we come to one of our bankruptcy points. If 1913 is the beginning of it, and we'll talk more and more as we go through here, every about 20 years, we have another bankruptcy event. And that bankruptcy event was when FDR said, we're going to go off the gold standard. Now, this is a point of reference. Now, I've said this wrongly in the past. Can I admit my mistakes? Yes. So it's not going off the gold standard. Now, we couldn't have gold for our money. So in essence, that is correct. But the world could turn in their cash for gold. So what they did is they went from 20 bucks a share, and they moved that price up to $33 a share only 1 year later. So they devalued our cash. Sounds exactly like this system over here. And by the way, at the same time frame, we were definitely having IRS taxation. So they were getting you coming and going. They got you on your amount of your money. The other governments were good because that number stabilized from around about 35 and stayed that way all the way through 71. We'll talk about that one another time. So they created the fiat currency. So they get you with your IRS taxation. They devalue the currency so that it's always reduced every single iteration that the U.S. Mint puts out the money. So by the time it comes back to you, you have something called devaluation, or another term is called inflation, which means that prices rise in the situation when the money is reduced.